So every time a customer comes with a new digitalization request, it's actually perverse because you just think, here's one more complexity in my operation. And no matter you're a street cleaner or a vendor or a high-paid executive, everyone thinks it's going to get better. And that's not something that you see elsewhere in the world. It's not that humans are born with this innate lust to overconsume. A lot of it is socially conditioned. And so I think we actually have a chance with the Asian consumer. And I think international organizations have a great propensity to start programs, but they are having difficulty ending programs. Proof is in what change can you make on the ground.
Welcome to another episode of The Schelling Point, where ideas meet. Today, it's my pleasure to speak with Pamela Mar, the Managing Director of the International Chamber of Commerce Digital Standards Initiative, ICC DSI. Pamela, in her role, has been flying all over the place to meet with a different stakeholder to spread the good words about digital trade. Me, along with a few others, have been trying to support her in this mission. How are you doing today, Pamela?
Pretty good. And by the way, I really appreciate your support for the cause.
Yes, I have to say it's not just me. It's me and a bunch of other people. Today, I think we want to talk about ICC DSI. But before we get to this, one thing I would like to spend some time to start with is to talk a bit about your background. I think you have a really interesting background and journey before you took on your current role. Mm-hmm. So I know that you worked with the World Economic Forum in Geneva. You worked for some NGO in Thailand. You worked for some corporates in mainland China, TCL, I think a Fung group. How did you go about having this really interesting jump of different roles through your career?
So my career is actually very nonlinear, and I never had a plan over what I wanted to do. And I always took my jobs based on what I wanted my next learning to be. So you're right, I've worked in corporate. That was right after university. I actually worked for Star TV in Hong Kong doing business development. And then I decided that actually that's too far from developing Asia, right? Satellite TV was a luxury. And most people in Asia, they're just so far from satellite TV. They don't have water and electricity and housing. And so I decided I should go work for an NGO and really find out what the villagers need. And so I joined a NGO in Thailand, and I was the business initiative in rural development for a very well-known organization in Thailand. And I had to learn Thai. I was sent to the villages to basically bring companies to educate and help villagers make more income from what they had. So it was things like returning a factory from Bangkok to the rural areas so that you don't have to have migrant workers. It was things like bottling and making preserves out of mango instead of selling the mangoes. So it was all ways to empower the villagers. And what I learned was, I've spent my whole life in cities in developed countries. I have an elite education. I'm pretty useless in the village. and it's not just that I wasn't Thai and my Thai was very rudimentary, but I just don't have any of the right instincts. So I realized, okay, I may have the passion, but I have to find the area where my passion makes a difference when matched with what I bring to the table. And so I got a master's degree in management to give myself some credentials. And then I went to Geneva to work for the World Economic Forum, responsible for Asia, for Greater China, because that was where I was really interested. I want to work in Asian development. I want to help the region grow. And so the WEF is a great platform to enable Asian nations to hook into global issues and to begin to have their voice heard on the global scale.
I think that was before China acceded to WTO, right? It was around that time, right?
Well, it was actually China acceded to the WTO in 1999, and I actually joined the WEF in 1999. So it was the age where China was first starting to build its presence in the world. But it was still quite tentative.
Yeah.
And we had to do a lot to convince them that global integration was going to be beneficial for the Chinese economy.
Right.
And then eventually I realized after 5 years with the WEF, on the outside trying to cajole Chinese enterprises and so on into participate in global affairs and come to interact with global executives and so on, and basically globalize, that if you're always on the outside trying to get Chinese or get Asians to do something, you'll never really understand and empathize. So that's why then I decided, okay, I could stay in a very comfortable life with a very famous organization, but I want to go to the next level.
Right.
So I went and I got a job with a Chinese mainland enterprise called TCL, which is located in Shenzhen, China. So I went from Switzerland to Shenzhen. It's a bit of a culture shock. And
that's Shenzhen 20 years ago. It's not the Shenzhen, the gleaming city of today, right?
Absolutely. It was a time of high development for Shenzhen. I learned so much because Shenzhen was like really rapidly developing. They were using electric buses. They were putting solar panels on traffic lights. They were opening new border crossings.
Right.
They were really plowing ahead. And actually, when I arrived, I think Shenzhen had 2 metro lines. And when I left, I think it had 5 or 6. And they just plowed right through.
Yeah.
And that was the Chinese way of development. And for the enterprise, actually, TCL, that was the age where they were going global because they bought some assets from a French TV company. So it was actually running the television making supply chain. And I mean, it was a great experience. But like I said, it was a bit of a culture shock because I went from a Swiss organization in Geneva to working in Shenzhen. I was on the financial transactions side, and I ended up doing restructuring and being basically the voice of Chinese management in Paris, trying to restructure the European enterprise, which was a very fascinating experience.
Wait, hold a sec. So it's TCL in China by acquiring assets in France, and you were dealing with the French business they bought. Restructuring.
So it was a
that must be a nightmare.
Sales network of 7 countries and 1,000 employees across Europe, and it was why would anyone sell that? Because it's losing money.
Yes,
right?
Of course.
And so the Chinese took it over. The signing ceremony was a big political event.
Yeah.
It was maybe a bit rushed because they wanted to make it on the visit of a Chinese official to France. And almost immediately it was a bleeding cash. And so I was actually sent, and I spent a year in Paris trying to wind down that operation. And it was very fortunate that I spoke French. And, tried to, but I needed to learn what's labor law in Europe compared to China. Like, there was all kinds of cultural issues just going on.
I think France is probably the worst place to do that in Europe, by the way. Prud'homme, the French labor law is probably the stringent in Europe. It wasn't the easiest place to do this job.
I won't comment on that, but I did another restructuring in the United States shortly thereafter, and actually the United States one was infinitely easier because you have at-will employment and you can just tell people, bye, and then they'll just sign happily and go on their way. And that's not how things work in France or anywhere in Europe. But so after a period of time in Shenzhen, I realized that there's a ceiling over my head because I'm not Chinese.
Yes.
And I'm actually the wrong gender. So today things are very different. Okay, but at that time, I needed a next stage, and so I actually moved to Hong Kong and started working for the Fung group for the chairman, and that's where I actually got most of my experience in running a global supply chain for consumer products industry. It was actually a perfect segue into my present position because in that with Li and Fung, I basically realized that a lot of the barriers to why small factories and manufacturing enterprises across developing Asia, why they were always on the short end of the stick. no access to finance, no capability, no visibility, and always being squeezed globally. And so those are not issues you can address factory by factory. Those are issues.
Maybe expand a little bit for audience what does Li and Fung do? Because some people may not be aware of this.
So the Fung Group is basically managing multinational supply chains.
Yeah.
So, and it's for consumer products. So like toys, clothing, furniture, and so on. And what they do is they basically source for international brands.
Yeah.
So if you're a large international retailer with stores, basically the Fung Group runs your back end. They can do everything from designing the product, design the whole season, source raw material, manage the manufacturing process, quality control, compliance it, arrange the delivery to your warehouse in the destination consumption country.
Yeah.
So it is really a window onto the developing world, because consumer products are the first stage of entry of any country. Like if you're poor, you first get into clothes.
Yeah.
Right? You start manufacturing clothes and then cheap toys and white t-shirts, and then as you progress up the wage and value ladder, you begin to manufacture higher value things.
Yeah.
So higher value clothes, more things requiring more precision, until you exit consumer products and you go to electronics, automobile, light industrial products, and heavy industrial products. So this experience with consumer goods is actually, it's a window onto the developing world, but also onto the struggles of small and medium-sized enterprises. Because the barriers to entry, if you want to start a semiconductor wafer plant, you probably have to have several billion, right? But if you want to start a clothing factory, you just need 100 sewing machines. And so there's a lot of small enterprises who don't have access to capital, who hire workers because they're cheap and maybe not educated. And so if you think about, in the world of digital trade, we're coming to factories and we're saying, oh, you should digitalize. And what they're thinking is, now I need to train my employees, I need to disrupt my process, I need to invest in new equipment, and I need to choose what platform to use, and maybe my customers don't use the same platform. So every time a customer comes with a new digitalization request, it's actually perverse, because you just think, here's one more complexity in my operation, and my back is already to the wall, and my margin is already 2%, 1%, and I just can't take it anymore. So my present job is actually the role of DSI. For me, I see it as trying to address the structural barriers which are preventing the rapid development of manufacturers across the developing world by giving them access to capital, knowledge, simplifying standards for cross-border trade, and making it easy to get that on-ramp to using technology to really drive their own improvement.
So I think you explained, you made the case really well why digital trade is important to have the growth, right? So when you make this case to businesses or government, maybe let's say government, because I think businesses, I think the case is pretty compelling, right? It's like you can make more money, you can grow, you can hire more people. How typically do you make the case to government in the developing world?
So for government, it's about digital trade as helping them achieve their overall development objectives. What are their objectives? Grow GDP, grow trade, create jobs, and drive inclusivity. Digital trade is the answer for all of these. And now, in this new tariff environment, where every supply chain has to justify with an auditable record of where it has traveled through and who has touched the product, digitalization is the only tool that can enable you to do that across thousands of SKUs. We used to do it manually in the supply chain, right? All that paperwork, but it's just you need an army of data nerds. And so now with digitalization, the way to do it is to build seamless data trails throughout your operation. Now, currently there are data trails throughout operation, but they're not integrated. They're basically closed networks which customers, buyers use for their own convenience. And information flows downstream. It flows to the buyer.
Yep.
The manufacturer generally never sees it. And the manufacturer can't port data across their different networks because the standards are different.
Yep.
Because there's laws about what can, there's practices about what can be exported, and there's usability issues because of lack of standards alignment. And so from a manufacturer, you actually never get the full benefit of your data because you can't aggregate it and you can't drive your insights. And also you have this complexity because all of these different digital platforms, they have different data requirements, different timing for upload, different data standards, and different rules about who can access, who can't. And so it just becomes really complex. And so from a government perspective, the government's role, harmonize legal, right? Make the supply chain have similar legal framework as it moves from country to country so we don't have to rewrite things every time. Free up capital, which means enable data to be aggregated so that SMEs can show their credit worthiness based on their transaction. SME doesn't have collateral, so the only way to lend is by transaction. And now how do you develop an auditable trail of transaction that will pass muster with KYC law? And that's through digitalization with tagged data and verified data. And the only way to do that is to start digitalizing those transactions that SMEs are participating on in the supply chain and let SMEs have power over their data, true power. Because today in a networks tell you, oh, you own your data, it's always in your hand, but it's so hard to make that a reality. So we want to make everything simpler from a standards perspective, interoperable from a platform perspective, and seamless from a data flow perspective, because the governance arrangements for that data flow have all been harmonized. And so for a government, what we say is, you want to unlock growth, you want to really help your SMEs, you want to create jobs at the base level, you can do this. It won't be an easy task because you basically have to disrupt what a lot of your departments might be doing. And you need to change the mindset from one of centralization and control to decentralize and open. And that is a massive, difficult shift that may not even be possible in one generation, but we're trying.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think we can tell from the way you describe it, you're clearly passionate about the mission of ICC DSI. And I agree with you. I think just talking about digitalization is actually a good slogan, but what it means and how to actually implement that is really, really difficult. And you need to, I think, just to echo what you're saying, it's not just about the government, right? There's a whole ecosystem, and you have to build the right incentive to have everybody willing to participate. So I think just to pick on that a little bit more, how do you see, what are the main challenges to achieve this? Because I think you've established clear goals, right? You want the data to be, the SMEs own their data, it's interoperable, everything digital to start with. What's blocking, what's preventing this thing to happen today?
So definitely legal is one of them. So if I change to digital, am I protected? We are solving that problem, right? We have 37% of global GDP already aligned to the model law on electronic transferable records, another 32% on the way. This is basically almost, it's the major trading nation. So legal is achievable.
Explain a bit more, what does MLETR mean actually for people who are not that digital trade nerds?
Yeah, so basically MLETR, the model law for electronic transferable records, enables the digitalization of the documents of title on the supply chain. So there's 36 key trade documents. 7 of them are documents of title, which are actually negotiable instruments, which means that they can actually be transferred. And they are documents of title, meaning that if you hold the document, you actually own the cargo. Or if you hold the promissory note, you actually got the money. So the reason that you need these, so they tend to contain a lot of the essential data of a supply chain, and they tend to be really important as the cargo shifts hands,
Yep.
and also as the cargo is financed.
Yep.
So you could, based on existing law today, the model law for electronic commerce, you could actually digitalize the invoice, right? We've
Yep.
all done that. Electronic invoice. You can digitalize purchase order. There's all the other 29 documents of trade documents that can be digitalized. But if you do all of this,
Yep.
and then at one point you have to print everything out, then what's the point? So
Yep.
what we're doing is enable the digitalization of the most important documents
Yep.
in order to drive the digitalization of the whole chain.
Yep.
And so this requires, it's a model law under which has been developed by the UN Commission on International Trade Law, and countries need to align their own legal system. So it's an actually act of legal reform.
Yep.
Some cases it's just an amendment, some cases a new law, but basically we have to walk the governments through this. But the governments, basically after the G20 has said do it,
Yep.
APEC has said do it, ASEAN has said do it, enough regional, enough global bodies have said, okay, this is the key
Yep.
to legal harmonization. And so they get it. It's just a question of how do we help them build the capability in their civil servants? How do we shift government systems so that like government procurement can begin to walk the walk?
Yep.
And how do we actually execute the legal reform, which actually requires, actually a legislative procedure. So it takes 2 years, 2.5 years, but
Yep.
it's doable, and governments are onto it.
Yep.
Now, but legal reform is just legal reform, right?
Yeah.
You can change the law and nothing can happen. So while the government's doing legal reform, we've always said, okay, while you're doing legal reform, engage business. Educate business on what gates are going to open when this is passed. What transactions can they actually do digitally, and what is the gain? Who does what and who gains what?
Yeah.
And we need to do extensive outreach and education and proofs of concept and pilots to basically demonstrate to businesses it's doable, not that hard, and a lot of gains.
Yep.
And this, a lot of businesses have heard about, but then there's always issues like my supply chain partner's not ready, my bank's not ready, I don't know which network to choose, I don't know which standard. So we're trying to basically simplify all of that. And eventually, we hope to bring the corporate ERPs and finance and IT infrastructure on board so that the corporations don't have the question of, I need to change the data in my ERP. Because if you need to change the data in your ERP, it's just a big hassle, and they won't do it. So we need to format data at the source to enable companies to just, without even thinking about standards, to upload those and create an electronic transferable record, which is then sent down the supply chain in a trusted, verified, authenticated form. And this is not, it's not like rocket science, but it does take a couple of key steps and engagement across supply chains which run through developed and developing countries, across countries which have different attitudes to data portability and different attitudes of customs authorities when it comes to open and closed and stringent and not stringent.
No, absolutely. I think just to pick on what you just said, I think the other thing also for the audience, right, is when I first started getting involved with GSBN and to understand what's mind-blowing is the entire trade process that we are using today basically has not changed since, let's say, 1400 Florence. It's like since the Medicis, a letter of credit, bill of lading, all this is basically the same way as everybody has been doing. So the biggest challenge I see when you do your work, when you go to pitch people, everybody's, yes, I want to be digitized, I want to be fast, everything's good. But the problem is, everybody you're trading with, you have to convince not only myself, I need to change, also I need my counterparty to change also. And everyone it's very easy to point fingers. Like, I want to change, but they don't want to change. Or if we both want to change, the bank don't want to change. Or if the banks willing to change, the customs don't want to change. So it's kind of, if you don't get everybody in the party together, it's really, really hard. I think that's probably the part that's really the most mind-boggling, how complicated, how hard it is. Because it sounds like it should be easier than, let's say, sending a man to Mars.
I mean,
but to some degree, sometimes the challenge you're facing, I think, is really daunting because you have to commit so many people to do the change at the same time, right?
the complexity of the change is due to the fact that a lot of people are involved in supply chains, a lot of different parties with different schedules for digitalization.
Right.
Right. What may be a priority for you is not a priority for your counterpart. So what we're trying to do is actually make it frictionless as possible to go digital, which means map your data at the source. Means don't spend time arguing over which platform to use, because the platforms should actually all interoperate based on common data standards. And don't argue over which jurisdiction should go first, because actually the jurisdictions should all have the align to the same legal framework. So we're trying to reduce the reasons that organizations can choose not to go ahead. And the thing is, it's not like for me, nobody's against digitalization, of course. No one would be against digitalization, but it's all a question of how much is it going to cost me now in disruption and in people, because I have to aggravate my people to get them to learn new ways of doing things. And so it's always a trade-off of, is it the right time for me? And there's, and especially in today's business environment, where you have so many reasons to say, I have to pay attention to tariffs. I can't put time on making these large-scale changes. We need to make the connection between get ready for the future by digitalizing. You're going to get more if you start today. And it will be cheaper if you start today than wait for the rest of the world to be ahead of you. And then you have to double time to catch up. Actually,
I think also there's another argument when you pitch to government, right, is there's a sort of a competition between different countries. Like whoever goes first, I think, that's my opinion at least, you will reap more rewards than countries who are not as digitally trade enabled, because, as you said, we're moving towards a world where trade should become more digitized, easier, because there are more constraints coming towards you, right? Such as tariffs, such as trade disruption. And you just cannot use paper to do this kind of business anymore. Paper just forces you to be more static, to wait for things to happen and for bad things to happen to you, as opposed to more digital, you're more nimble, more resilient, and there's better response time to external shock, right? So I think that's really the key thing. One thing I want you to double click a bit more. So you also mentioned that a little bit. Today you're dealing with governments, right, in different regions, and clearly we established that your background has been, you work in Geneva, China, France, US. I'm picking 3 locations, right? Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand. They're all going through some form of trade digitalization. I think Singapore is more ahead because they passed the law already 2 or 3 years ago, I think. Hong Kong is about to pass. I won't say thanks to you, but I think you'll be a big proponent to push the Hong Kong government to adopt this. I think Thailand, actually, I'm not sure where stage Thailand is. Can you describe it more?
At the cabinet.
At the cabinet level, okay.
It's sitting at the cabinet level.
Okay. Can you describe it more, like, how do you see, I won't say there are 3 archetypes, but culturally, the mindset, the trade, how are they different? How are they the same? And how does it impact your job to influence them to be more digital? And maybe other countries are feeling kind of the similar profile.
Singapore, obviously, a very unified approach, an early commitment to digital, to make digital a core competitiveness of the Singaporean economy. And then the governance structure through its ministries and so on to adopt an integrated approach. So obviously, Singapore is a trailblazer in this area, but I think we should also look at China. China made its commitment to adopt MLETR in 2023. We have actually been working with China together with the Asian Development Bank to train up their civil servants in the Ministry of Commerce and working with, for example, Shanghai Port and so on. And in China also, despite its scale, actually the call has gone out quite decisively to the financial sector, to the customs and ports, and to the ministries to get ready. And they've even permissioned MLETR in 2 locations in China and to encourage exploration. Now, is China selling this capability internationally? Not yet. But it is definitely getting ready so that when the law passes, the country is actually already there. Now, other countries have also engaged business. So in Thailand, the government made a very early commitment to electronic transactions by setting up the Electronic Transactions Development Authority, which has taken charge of developing the digital infrastructure for digital economy, and also engaging the business sector. Now, if you look at where Thailand is on GDP per capita, you would not have thought that Thailand is going to be the second location in East Asia to adopt MLETR. Because Thailand's GDP per capita is what, like 8,000, 9,000 US dollars per capita. You would have thought, okay, Japan, Korea, maybe Australia, Malaysia first. And the thing is, with MLETR and with digital trade, you don't have to be the richest. You just have to be committed, and you have to engage business to allow the business sector to actually understand the value. And although Singapore has developed SG TradeX under the government and Trade Trust also under the government doesn't need to do everything. So in Thailand, the government has supported the development of prompt pay and the trading platform, but I believe these were private sector led developments, right? It came from the banks, came from the manufacturers. And the thing is, development there's so many ways to go forward with development, and digital trade is no exception to that. I'm sure that by the time the G50, the 50 largest global economies, get done with MLETR, there's going to be at least 40 different models. You have to count Europe as one model, so maybe 30 different models. But there's really you have to start with what you have. So when we get asked, what is the best way to do MLETR, right? This is a very difficult question, right? Because the best way is the one which will incentivize your people to make the change. And
that's very true.
That's something that's culturally determined. Just like, what do you do to get a company to digitalize? Well, that really depends what the company is and what its culture is, what its incentive structure is, what tools you give them, the level of empowerment. So all those things are culturally determined.
So that's a very good point. I think, not only the culture, but I think I agree with you 100% on the incentive. Because I don't think you can force anyone to do it if the proper incentive is not set in place. And sometimes it comes from the government, sometimes it's not the government, it's also the market structure of the businesses, right? And they are all kind of in competition, they want to do better on the business side. So it's all about setting up the right infrastructure business environment to incentivize them to do it. Now, okay, so we've talked about what ICC DSI is doing, what's the mission, the goal. What is the timeline, or how do we know you've succeeded? Like, what's the KPI? What's the measure that we can look at? That means Pamela has finished the job.
Yes, my KPI. So MLETR alignment in 80% of global trade by 2029, 2028, 2029, 2030. So what matters here is not the law passing. What matters here is the government commitment. It's like stock market. Everything's already baked. Business investment will start once the legal road is clear. So what we're really going for is public commitment and allocation of government resources to actually make this happen. So that's one. The second is adoption. Right? So we know EBL, Electronic Bill of Lading, is one of the most harmonized documents. So we are definitely looking at EBL. But there's 4 types of functions going on in the supply chain. Transport. So EBL might be our proxy for transport, but there's also finance. So we need a proxy for financial trade finance. We need a proxy for border and regulatory, probably something to do with the single windows.
Yeah.
And then the last one is commercial, the actual act of making the deal. So we need measures of adoption. And here it's not just, are you digitalizing this process? It's actually, are you digitalizing it in a way that the data will be portable and plug and playable across the supply chain? So we absolutely need to work on the interoperability, because otherwise we're just going to all end up in a very fragmented world where data is siloed, and it'll be very difficult for anyone but big companies to get any benefit from that.
No, I agree 100%. I think one of the traps that we want to avoid, just to put it another way, right, is everything is digitized, but it's all different formats, different way to do things, and you end up being the hell, just keep keying data, like, oh, this is the EVR, I have to key in the data. If this is an invoice, I have to key the data, even though it's the same data. And then you don't know where the data is coming from, can you trust it or not? That's the wrong way to digitize, right? Absolutely. Okay, so on digitization, I think clearly, I think you have a handle on it. It's pretty clear, you know what you want to do. Now, I think it's still very challenging. There's another aspect also I want to quickly pick your brain on. When I first met you at Li & Fung, right, I think you were focusing at that time on sustainability at Li & Fung, right? And I would argue that actually digitalization is one stream of work, but there's potentially other benefits you can go from supply chain perspective is anything to do with sustainability as increasingly becomes something that's important to a lot of stakeholders globally, right? So talk to us a bit more. If we achieve this digitalization, is there any knock-on effect that we may have also for sustainability?
Yes. So first of all, I think digitalization, people frequently mention that, paper will be reduced in the supply chain, because we're not actually transacting documents. And I think this might be true, but actually the effect is quite negligible.
Yep. Okay.
The real effect is in empowering the SMEs. Because once you empower SMEs and make them feel like they're in control of their digitalization trajectory, that will unleash a lot of innovation from them. I think in the supply chain, in the consumer product supply chain especially, the pressure is always downwards, right? The supplier always gets the short end, and they have to answer only to their buyers. And so they don't really control their own development. And in fact, this is literally, I have been in factories where I'm asking, well, so what's your 3-year or 5-year plan for development? And the literal answer will be, I am not sure I'm going to be here next year. So we need to empower that sector of enterprises. Now, there's also the question, which I have been confronted with by several of my leftist friends, that by making trade easier and making it cheaper, that we are actually promoting overconsumption.
Yes.
And that we're going to drive up global emissions because of shipping goods around the world. And to this, I would say that people want different things. And they want things that are from international suppliers, right? Because you can't grow everything in your own country, nor should you, right? So the law of comparative advantage is not something that can really be contested.
Yep.
Now, are we promoting overconsumption? I would say, yeah. If you're basically shipping things in over quantities, if you're flooding the market, then you are actually promoting overconsumption. But I would also counter that a lot has to do with society and culture.
Yep.
So why is it that in Europe consumer spending is maybe 50% of their GDPs, but in the US consumer spending ranges from 65 to as high as 85 back before the financial crisis? And that's and why in Europe can you say to the average person, this t-shirt is €1 and it was made by slave labor or child labor. This t-shirt is €5. Which one will you buy? That will work in Europe. Why? So, and that I'm just trying to say that it's not that humans are born with this innate lust to overconsume. A lot of it is socially conditioned. And so I think we need to work on public education, on what is really in the product. And I think product footprinting directives will actually help that, to help people understand, and also brands have to take responsibility to educate consumers. You can't just take the money and run. You actually have to be a part of the change. And that's a lot of what we were trying to do at the Fung Group by putting sustainability attributes into products. And these are things that have to continue. And so I think we actually have a chance with the Asian consumer. So the Asian consumer hasn't yet matured, right? We're not yet to the age of Asians being the majority of global consumption. It's still Europe and the US, probably more on the US. But if we play our public education right, Asia can actually be the new paradigm of healthy consumption, where you consume what you need, you use it until it truly breaks, and you dispose of it wastefully. Now, I think we have a lot of work to do in Asia because we don't handle our trash correctly. We don't handle our plastics correctly. So if you look at the countries which are, plastics polluters, they're all number 1 through 5 is Asian. So we have a lot of work to do, but I think the age of Asian consumption still is an open question. And so if we can do anything about that, we should.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think the contrast between European and US, that's really very striking to me, because I grew up in France, worked in US. And I think a lot of people want to go to US and say, oh, the standard of living is higher. But I think it's maybe, the other way to think about it is maybe you just spend way more money. I think culturally also people are more willing to swipe their credit card in US, which is driven by the financial sector, and they make a lot of money on the credit card, and therefore it's kind of I won't say vicious circle, but it's a circle that's pushing everybody to consume more. To react on that actually brings to another interesting point of discussion, right? So let's put digitalization aside for a moment. As you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of disruption today to global trade, right? I would even say there's potentially a question about, do we still want global trade as defined today? Like people that start to question global trade. And I think it used to be when you have the CEO of finance, chief executive of banks, each year fly to Davos. That was the pinnacle of success, right? You have the the most powerful people discussing the future of the world. However, today it's clear that there is this new wave of popular discontent, or people feeling that they've been left on the side of the road to this transformation of global trade, right? And you can agree or disagree, but it's hard to argue with the fact that for a lot of people, they feel the benefit of globalization has not been accrued equitably among everyone in the population, in US, in Europe. And if in a sense, I think the angst today is the global trade is actually maybe bad for the workers, right? In a developed world, not in developing world, they rise, they become richer, but in the developed world, definitely people say, we've lost our purchasing power. And the last 20 years actually has been getting worse and worse. So how would you respond to people who feel that globalization in a sense has been unfair and we should actually do less cross-border trade? Like what's your response to people who say this, no more trades, let's just build everything ourselves?
My response is that economic change is a part of life, and the fact that your factory has had to close and that you have been, left out of work, your reaction to that should not be to oppose global trade, which is the forces that have forced it to close, but rather to look and see, how do I get back on my feet in order to move with the times? So why is it that there's a greater backlash in the United States than in Europe? And I would counter that actually that's due to worker protections. We go back to my story. When I was working for TCL, we did a restructuring in the United States, and the workers actually got maybe 1 week for every year that they had been employed, and that's it. And there was no protection. We didn't have to even warn them that we were going to do this. Whereas in Europe, actually some of the workers in some of the plants got 14 months average compensation. There was a process during which the workers had to be informed through specific channels that this was going to happen. So the idea of the worker as being a protected entity, like a protected by state law, that actually saved them and gave them more opportunity to go find their next position.
Right.
And I think that is a big thing, is that the unions are important because they protect the workers' rights in an age where shareholders actually have a lot of power. So I think, and this also speaks to why, I guess why Europe has more social protections, is that they believe that social protections like unemployment insurance, health insurance, housing and unemployment benefits actually are critical to give people the confidence to go out and find something else to do. So I think whether it's globalization, which is effecting economic change, or something else, we need to ensure that people actually are empowered to go and seek their next employment. And if you look in Asia, buyers switch factories all the time. And factories have this ongoing turmoil. And I think one opportunity for Asia is to transition the workers to a better place using state protections. And that's linked to savings rates. It's linked to what governments spend their public resources on. It's linked to education system, on how you educate people to actually go and find their next employment. And that is another opportunity, that if we're going to have the age of Asian consumption, what does the age of Asian production look like? Because we have to build that resilience into the economy, because we saw what happens when that resilience isn't present in the United States. And there's all kinds of studies which show that people don't recover. And part of the reason I would argue is that there's nothing to help them recover. Oh, there's too little.
No, definitely. I think the last 20 years in the US, at least my personal experience, right, is the society is very highly financialized. Or after, let's say, the great financial crisis, it's not the finance people making the money, it's actually the technologists, but whereby a lot of the benefit for globalization has not accrued equitably. And there's no system in place to actually protect the downtrodden who needs to be re-educated or find new opportunity. And sometimes also the dignity of work, right? If you don't have a job, then everything goes downhill. You have more crime, drugs, addiction, and things like that. And it's very easy to see how that can really destabilize and endanger some of the sector. Okay, so if let's say we pick on this thematic even further, right now the narrative also of this globalization is not just US has or Europe has seen some loss of jobs, right? It's also pitting US versus China to some degree, right? I think in the past you had Asian country has been becoming richer and has been jumping one country to another country, so starting from Japan, then Taiwan, and then Korea, Hong Kong, and then China. But it seems like after China, China is basically now such a dominating country, and it hasn't jumped outside of China. Just China is doing everything, and I think there's one sense that really people in the West do not fully understand what's going on in China, right? And there's more and more attention. And this year, I think, very specifically me, as was born in China and grew up in France, can clearly feel that very, 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 very strangely. This year, I think people will be talking about a Sputnik event, a Sputnik moment, or DeepSeek moment, right? Whereby a lot of people are surprised of some of the development happening in China, especially people from the US or Europe. Like, how did you experience this year? Because I think we have very similar background. What was the thing I think that was most surprising to your friends or colleagues in the US or Europe that has happened this year?
So I think basically the speed of development and the speed of people's adaptability to completely new circumstances, completely new ways of doing things. There's no protection of we've always done it this way. And I think that's actually really healthy, because it teaches you that don't be content with today because there's always something that can be improved. And on the other side, don't be complacent.
Yep.
Because you can't just coast through life. No autopilot. You have to always be going to get them. You know, this idea that you can really zero base your assumptions and create something that may be fantastical. That is actually possible. And when I lived in China, the one thing that was so inspiring but also shocking is that no matter you're a street cleaner or a vendor or a high-paid executive, everyone thinks it's going to get better, and they are willing to put their nose to the stone in order to improve their lot. And that's not something that you see elsewhere in the world, where the entire society is like willing to sacrifice in order to work on their own position, and where they see that it's that this national sacrifice is worth it because they are given a place in something that's always improving. And I think, so today there's stories that there's more unemployment and there's less opportunity, but I think the people have been raised with this feeling that they can actually affect change in their own circumstance.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually, that's incredible that the whole country is that way. And I know that there's a lot of issues with the government, and that in some municipalities or some townships, the government is not always as progressive as it should be, or responsive to local concerns as it should be. And I think there's still underlying that the feeling that actually justice will come.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's really that's a contrast to what I see in the U.S., where people basically gave up on the political system.
Yeah.
Right. That's why you have only 40% of the registered voters who are participating in the national election. That's crazy for me. And you know, then don't even count the people who aren't registered. But I
think I don't know if you heard this joke, but people were saying in US you change politician, but you don't change the policy. In China, you don't change the party, but you change the policy.
Yeah.
That is a contrast between two countries.
That's a bit controversial. Let's not go there.
Actually, another question for you. Just double click what you just said, right? I think 100% agree. I think there's this can-do attitude, which I think was also at some point a characteristic of the American culture, I think, right? And in the 50s, 60s, when there's this optimism. And then now I think, including Europe, we have this pessimism where things cannot change. Right. There's nothing I can do. There's no agency. So let's put that aside for a moment. But at the same time, I think a lot of the reaction I'm seeing from including my friends in Europe and US, right, is there's a lot of surprise what China can do. Sometimes it's not even surprise. It's like I feel just like people do not understand. It's like there's completely another planet, and people attribute a lot of thought process, a different way of doing things. What do you think is the root of this narrative that people have about China from the West? And also, I think increasingly the most important thing in my mind is, as long as people don't understand what's happening, it's really hard to resolve the tension, the issue, because tension issue does exist, right? But if you don't understand, it's really impossible to resolve. And then over the next 10 years, something has to happen to resolve this tension, because it's not sustainable. We cannot just keep going this way. So how do you see the narrative also about China change over the next 5-10 years, starting from where we are today?
I mean, I completely agree that fundamentally people in Europe and the US are fed a narrative about China which is different from reality. And consequently, they develop attitudes about what China is and what China isn't, which cannot be good because for so long, I mean, they've been basically able to command China what to do on the global stage, and now China's a bit basically too innovative, too wealthy, and too powerful in order to be talked down to. And countries shouldn't talk down to at all. We're moving towards a multilateral world, and so these kind of patronizing attitudes are not helpful. Now, what do we do about it? So I think here's where we could really benefit from media, basically diversifying the media. And I think making Chinese media accessible to the English-speaking world is if there's some philanthropist that can fund that, that would do so much good, because
I agree.
people read, like the media in the US is owned by what? 2, 3 companies,
Yes.
4 companies?
Yes.
And in Europe, it's a bit more diverse, but they're still very,
Yes.
very channeled. They don't have access to Chinese media, and so they presume that Chinese people are beaten down, repressed, unhappy, and worried about their human rights, which is, it couldn't be farther from the truth. And so I wish that that the biggest advance that AI can give us is greater global understanding. And I think that is critical for
And I think
people.
I think we've seen sort of that earlier this year where people reached out from TikTok to go to Xiaohongshu, and now you have way more YouTubers going to China to film China, which is really funny because I see there's some 20-something with a DJI camera streaming in China, and people realize, wait, hold on, like that's quite different than what I've been told what's happening there. And even you can sometimes see YouTube pushing this kind of content to more people because people watch it. So I mean, maybe it's not a media company will do that. Maybe it's just naturally people, as more people with the free visa program goes to China and experience themselves, they can potentially say, wow, hold on, like it's actually not exactly as people are telling me. So maybe another question for you, which is I think something that we cannot really dispute, right? Which is China really is probably the manufacturer of the world, right? So they really strong manufacturing in some, I would say, not just the T-shirt and shoes, right? Rather on the new technology that's of the future, right? So when people say this is technology of the future we want, which is an electric vehicle, batteries, and there's so much talent from STEMs, right? So many engineers that's trained. That's I think I forgot the statistic, but each year the number of STEM talent that graduate in China is more than the rest of the aggregate. What, in your opinion, the role China manufacturing has to play globally in a multipolar world in the next, let's say, 10 to 20 years? What should be the role of China manufacturing in that new world?
China is too capable and too big to exclude as a manufacturer. They will continue to lead, right? It's just a question of how fast China will move up the value chain, right? So they're already pretty advanced, right? They've set a national priority of becoming dominant in, I think, 8 strategic industries, right? Including nanotechnology, biotech, all of these national strategic industries, which are all high tech, and they pretty much succeeded in starting to dominate each of these. And I think the world should actually take advantage of that, because if you just look at we're talking about sustainability, solar prices, right? Today, 15 years ago, solar was 9 to 20 times more expensive than coal. Now today, solar is same price as coal, sometimes even cheaper. Why is that? And it's only because China plowed its manufacturing expertise into the solar panel industry and brought the prices down for everybody. Now, that's something we all benefit from. And so I think, but we almost let it happen by coincidence, just because no one else was willing to invest. But now we need to say, okay, China is going to build capability in this. And how does the rest of the world benefit? And the ways to benefit, if you're a developing country, hook yourself on to the China train as a component supplier, as a part of that ecosystem. And you can see that's what's driving ASEAN's, one supply chain strategy. That's what's behind RCEP. All of these different trade strategies, because they recognize China is a manufacturer that you can learn from. And so, and China's going to keep offshoring those the lower band of industries, and there's a lot of countries which could really benefit. You've got all of Africa. That's 1 billion people. And they're gonna be adding more people, and all of them have low education rate. Where can they go except to manufacturing?
Yeah.
And so I think we need to figure out, how does China help pull up the world and build that manufacturing capability indigenously in other developing countries. And it won't be easy, because Chinese enterprises, when they go abroad, they tend to go abroad very risk aversely, which means that there's a mainlander in charge, all the management will be mainlanders, and then only the workers are local.
Yes.
So we've got to, and then over time, that changes, and some of the middle management end up being local and so on. We have to figure out, how do we expedite that process, because the goal is not to have Chinese running global supply chains in a very Chinese style, but rather to use that manufacturing expertise to implant indigenous innovation and indigenous capability, because that's what will allow the whole floor of developing countries to rise.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%.
It's not like we need to make sure that it's done in a very empowering manner. And that, for me, should be the role of organizations like the UN, and IFC, and international organizations, including the ICC, to build
I think
capability locally.
To echo to your point, right? And I think this is a trade that I think China, the country, is willing to do, because it's sort of a condition to extend trade. And then so far, in terms of trade deal and negotiation, at least what has happened is China is very willing to, I won't say share completely transparently, but to give more, to invest in, let's say, the 10, 20 years, as opposed to just the short term, I want to make money next 1-2 years, right? And I think, just want to echo that, there's one book that I'm reading right now, I think that's kind of going to the rounds, and the author is going to all the podcasts in the US. I don't know if you've heard of this book, called Appalling China, by Patrick McGee.
I haven't heard of it, but
so it's really interesting, because the book is making the case, right? So everybody knows that Apple is successful because of China.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you can't have the manufacturing. And the book's theme is actually also China is successful because of Apple. And the idea is Apple went to China and teach everybody how to make smartphone. And to me, that's also very condescending approach to say, hey, I have those engineers, super smart engineers based in Silicon Valley, and they just teach those Chinese people had no idea what to do, and then they learned it, and now they are a threat. Which I think, to me, it's mind-boggling, because even if you read the book correctly, the idea was a lot of the thing that they invented to manufacture this iPhone didn't exist. So it wasn't a teaching, it was a collaboration, right? Is on one side, you have engineers who are very smart, who are very demanding, like the Apple, the Geneva, the designer, they're creating crazy new hardware that's not possible. And they had to partner with people in China who are very willing to learn and to allocate resources to build this. And then this combination created this basically company called Apple, where you can have, sorry?
And there was one other aspect, which is that the manufacturer of iPhone is actually Taiwanese.
Yes,
which goes to show it's not just like buyer and manufacturer, but there's a lot of space in the relationship for third parties to come in and add their expertise.
Yeah. So it's not zero-sum game. It's really a partnership with people. Everybody bring to the table what they're good at. Now, the most important thing is to make sure this relationship is balanced, and we don't have one side that's too powerful than the other one. And then it behooves to every country, as you say, the multilateral body, to make sure to have rules in place that this is indeed the case. And to in my opinion, actually, it's also the benefit of China to have this balance, because you don't want to have such an unbalanced situation where later on you have seeds for destabilization and country where people are poor, and then there's a crime, and then conflict. So I think we talk about the role potentially ASEAN and Africa can have with China. What's, in your opinion, the trade relationship can happen between US and China, Europe and China? In my opinion, I think the most interesting to watch is Europe and China, because this is where there's a more, I would say, a card to play. US and China, I think it's kind of the breakup has happened already, just watching how bad the breakup gets. But Europe and China, I think it's the most interesting. So what's, in your opinion, what are the paths you're seeing in the future?
So for me, I think Europe has to decide what it wants its own manufacturing sector to be. For me, they have no clear industrial policy.
Yeah.
They don't know what they want to be good at. And so it's only by knowing yourself that you can actually go out and develop relations with others. So for me, Europe has prevailed as a global power for so long, and they've been on the top of so many industries, and European multinationals are respected world around. But times are changing, and there's other competitors who may be just as capable as European companies. And I think there's a lot of mutual learning that can go on, and that can only happen when two sides sit across from the table as peers.
I agree 100%. I think I went to school in France, right? And if you look at in some domain in mathematics or engineering, some of the French engineers and French mathematicians has really contributed a lot. And I think that has been dominating since the century of Enlightenment, right? And Europe has such important contribution to the world,
Yes.
but at the same time, things are also changing. You just cannot discount completely the rise of Asia. And then
Right.
it's important then to think about what can I learn? What I don't have to agree with
Yes,
everything
what
that's
can I
happening,
learn?
but what can I learn, right? It should be about learning now, about teaching people how to do things.
Right.
And I think that's what in the internet you have this meme where when you have someone European who goes to a country in Africa is always giving people lectures.
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
when China goes to a country, it's more like, hey, I'm going to help you build this thing, but I'm not going to give you lecture. I'm not telling you how to
Yeah.
do your thing. It is your business. You'll figure it out. Okay, so I think to close on this thematic about the let's say repositioning of the relationship between different countries in the world, it sounds like the most important thing potentially that still has to be changed or adapted to it is multilateral bodies, right? So
Yes.
I think for the last 80 years, since essentially World War II, bodies such as International Chamber of Commerce, ICC, WTO, IMF, all those organizations, or UN, has been created and has really, I think, powered massive economic development of people in Asia, in developing countries, right? But it feels today, for a lot of people, those entities are now maybe not as well suited or maybe fixed in the time that's now gone, a reality that's different, right? How do you think those entities should be adapted or transformed or recreated to better serve the world we're living today as opposed to the world that was in the past?
So I think the most important thing is to recognize what what the present task is, and the present task is still concerned with development, but it's more about empowerment. And I think international organizations have a great propensity to start programs, but they are having difficulty ending programs. So programs tend to live forever. And so you have an ever expanding budget.
Yes.
And so I think we just need to be more focused about what we can do and can't do, and also more action oriented and implementation focused, which is how I've tried to run DSI.
Yep.
Is that we're not here to pontificate
Yep.
too much about digitalization and to hold a lot of conferences and publish a lot of papers.
Yep.
The proof is in what change can you make on the ground.
Yep.
And so I think a new approach at the global level with the UN would actually address a lot of the pressures on the UN system,
Yep.
such as budget, such as overlapping agendas,
Yep.
such as development where you actually don't really develop anyone but your own budget. And so I think this needs to happen. I don't know who can bring it about,
Yep.
but there's a lot of money being spent right now, and we need to make sure that it is actually directed to those at the ground level.
Yeah. I think what you're talking about, it's a bit the same as what I know he's a controversial character in the US. Elon Musk is trying to do the US, which Dodge,
Yeah.
which is essentially zero-based accounting and relooking at the entire budget of all those
Right.
organizations, and to say, yes, things has been going on this way for the last 80 years. However, the world has changed. We do not have the means to support such a large
Right.
organization and have so many overlapping projects. we need to be more strategic in what we want to do. And sometimes constraint actually bring more clarity of thoughts on what you should be focusing on. And there may not be as many projects, but maybe we achieve a better goal. And to me, fundamentally, it's about defining more clear KPI. That's why I think I'm asking you, what is the KPI? How do you measure the success? Because if you don't know what you're striving for, it's almost impossible to succeed, right?
Exactly.
Another area is something also potentially of interest to develop for multilateral institution. It is a new challenge that's coming up, right? Which is AI as a new technology challenge, transformation that's potentially impacting the whole world. And there has been discussion: do we want to create some regulation or at least some form of organization to regulate how AI is being developed, deployed, so that it's safe, equitable, and some people are also into the X risk, where the risk that AI goes rogue and kill everyone. So from your perspective, do you think there's merit to that? Should some organization at the UN level also consider this? Because I think AI, forget about the risk of extermination, people die. There's a potential chance also of more rich people get richer and poor people get poorer.
Yeah.
So what's your view on that? Should they should one of those organizations pick up this as also another thing to focus on?
And this is not something that I've drawn any conclusions on. I actually think that the present way that we develop global rules has to be improved because it has to be more flexible.
Right.
And for that reason, I don't think that a body such as, and this is why those global institutions have run into issues, is because their way of developing global rules is somehow stuck and it doesn't work. So I do think that there should be some kind of a global guiding set of principles on the use of AI. I don't think it should be a hard law because hard law is so difficult to evolve. And the one thing with technology is it changes so fast that once you get a law, then it's already out of date. And so we don't want necessarily to be trapped in this cycle of trying to impose a law for something that is already outdated. So I think we do need guiding principles, which can actually play the crucial role of educating the users and the companies who are trying to deploy. Because I think there is space in the corporate sector for guidance on what should you be using AI for and what should you be watching out for.
I agree.
And I think that's the priority.
I agree with you 100%. I think that's probably the difference, the contrast people draw between the European methods and then the US methods, right? European, let's impose GDPR, and privacy is very important, but by doing that, you completely destroy, make impossible to build a like tech giant. Do not go completely US side where let the company do whatever they want, and then we have a problem later on. So you have to strike the right middle. I think the risk we're seeing today where people try to put AI regulation, when I think happened during the Biden administration, is it was way too constraining, and it was more used by some company to build walls so that they can make more money to become monopolies, right? Okay.
And that for me is why to be in Asia these days is super exciting. Because if you watch what's coming out of ASEAN, the Digital Economy Framework Agreement, this is a potential to be the new paradigm for how countries use technology in the future. And we can really learn from the European and American approach and apply the best of both in Asia. So I'm staying put for the moment.
Okay. Okay, so this is, I think we go to the last portion of the podcast. We have one question that we ask all our guests. Who should we invite next to the sharing point? And what do you think this unique perspective that they can bring? And can you make an intro to that person?
Yes, I would love to invite some of my old colleagues from the Fung group, those who actually work on the front lines of supply chains. Because so often in these high-minded discussions of policy and trade and digitalization, we're missing the frontline perspective. And it's only by understanding the concerns of users at the front lines can we actually make those changes. And so, I will make the outreach and pass them over to you.
Great. I think we have just like three, I would say, more fun questions. Just three questions very quickly, just to pick between three choices, pick between X or Y. Changi Airport, Hong Kong Airport.
Hong Kong.
Hong Kong Airport, okay. Head of corporate strategy at a Fortune 500 company or policy at the NGO?
NGO.
NGO. Idealist or pragmatist?
Right in the middle.
Oh, you're not choosing. Okay. Thanks, Pamela. It was great talking to you. Where
thank you
can
so
we
much.
find you online?
LinkedIn.
Okay. What's your LinkedIn tag? Oh, okay. Pamela Mar.
It's just
Look you up
Pamela
on LinkedIn.
Mar.
Okay.
And you'll recognize me.
Sure. Thanks a lot for your time today.
Thank you so
If
much.
you enjoyed the episode and you have any question, feel free to drop us in the comments. Till next time, the Schelling Point where idea meets again. Thank you.